She bought her parents a house, hoping to earn their love, but she wasn't even invited to the housewarming party. Her golden sister was already living there. What she did next was something no one expected. Subscribe to the channel and write where you're watching this video from. Laura's earliest memories were not of lullabies or bedtime stories, but of hushed whispers behind closed doors, the clink of dishes from the kitchen as her mother sighed, and the quiet sobs she made herself forget. From the very beginning, she had a vague sense that she wasn't supposed to be there, as though her presence disrupted a fragile balance that had once existed perfectly without her. Her mother, Irina, had not meant to have another child. That much was made clear in both subtle gestures and careless remarks. The pregnancy had come as a surprise, a disruption to a life that revolved around the family's golden child, Amelia, born 10 years earlier and already entrenched in her throne of parental admiration. Irina was a tall, striking woman whose sharp cheekbones and stiffer-than-necessary posture made her seem colder than she might have intended. Yet, for Amelia, she softened, became warm, affectionate, proud. Laura had never seen that version of her mother aimed in her direction. Her father, Stephen, was quieter in his distance, retreating into long hours at work and the comfort of routine. He rarely looked Laura in the eye. When he did, his gaze held a flicker of resignation, a tired acceptance of something he hadn't chosen. Amelia was everything their parents wanted. Bright, obedient, pretty, in a pageant girl sort of way, and always excelling. She played the violin, took ballet lessons, and brought home straight A's. Their home was filled with photos of Amelia, on stages, in classrooms, in gleaming white dresses. Laura, if she appeared at all, was often in the corner of the frame, blurry or half-cropped out. She learned to stand out of the way, both literally and metaphorically, shrinking herself in doorways, speaking softly, not asking for seconds at dinner unless offered. As a child, Laura once asked her mother why there were so few pictures of her in the family albums. Irina didn't look up from folding laundry as she said, "Sweetheart, you just weren't planned. Everything was different with Amelia. She was our first." There was no malice in her voice, but that made it worse. It was matter of fact, like stating the weather. Their modest home, located in a working-class neighborhood on the south side of town, held the echoes of this favoritism in every crevice. Amelia's room was twice the size of Laura's, with pastel walls and shelves lined with trophies and plush toys. Laura's room, once a storage space, still smelled faintly of old paint and mothballs. She would lie awake at night and listen to the faint music drifting from Amelia's stereo down the hallway, pretending she lived somewhere else, in another family, one that looked at her the way they looked at her sister. But Laura was not entirely alone. Her grandparents, Irina's parents, stepped in to provide what her own parents could not, or would not. Mabel and Harold were the first people who truly saw Laura. Mabel was warm and fiercely intelligent, a retired high school literature teacher who wore wool sweaters and made the best cornbread in the world. Harold, a former school principal, still carried the quiet authority of a man who had once ruled hallways full of rowdy children. When Laura stayed at their home, which became more frequent as the years went on, she was allowed to be a child, not a burden. Every weekday morning, Laura's father would drop her off at their little cottage across town. As he placed her small backpack on the step, he'd mutter, "You wanted her," to Harold, jingling his car keys like punctuation before driving off. Harold would open the door with a smile and say, "And we're glad we did." Those mornings became Laura's sanctuary. At her grandparents' kitchen table, she would eat oatmeal with brown sugar and listen to Harold explain math puzzles using sugar packets and jelly beans. "Numbers don't lie," he would say, tapping the table with his calloused finger. "People do, but numbers tell you the truth if you know how to read them." Laura learned to love numbers for their logic, their fairness, their refusal to bend to opinion. In the afternoons, Mabel would help her with homework, her warm hand steady as she guided Laura's pen across the page. "Knowledge is the one thing no one can ever take from you," she'd say again and again, like a mantra. In between algebra problems and spelling tests, they would bake together, and Mabel would let Laura measure everything herself. "Precision, my dear. There's a kind of magic in getting it just right." The contrast between these moments and her time at home was stark. At home, Laura was invisible. Her mother barely acknowledged her presence, except when chores needed doing or when Amelia needed something. Her father's silence was less cold than vacant, as though he were waiting for her to disappear. The only time they came alive was when Amelia entered the room. Amelia, for her part, barely noticed Laura's existence. There was no cruelty in her actions, at least none that was overt. It was as if Laura occupied a different dimension, invisible and irrelevant. Amelia would lounge on the couch, chatting on the phone about boys and college applications, while Laura sat quietly in the corner with her books or dolls, pretending she didn't hear the laughter that excluded her. When school events came around, the inequality deepened. Amelia's concerts, debates, and recitals were well-attended affairs. Irina would spend days helping her pick out outfits, and Stephen would adjust his work schedule to be there. But when Laura had a science fair or a spelling bee, there was always an excuse. "We're too tired," Irina would say. "You understand, don't you?" And Laura would nod, pretending she did. But someone always came. Harold and Mabel were at every event, cheering the loudest, beaming with pride. They took photos, brought flowers, and always took her out for ice cream afterward. "You did brilliantly," Mabel would whisper, tucking a loose braid behind Laura's ear. "I hope you know how proud we are of you." And for a little while, Laura would forget the rest. By the time she was 10, Laura had internalized her role as the afterthought. She learned to stay quiet, to avoid asking for things, to clean up after herself and everyone else. She knew the washing machine cycles by heart, could fold laundry better than most adults, and had learned to cook simple meals. Her mother didn't need to ask. Laura anticipated needs before they were voiced. She hoped things might change when Amelia left for college. Maybe, finally, her parents would notice her. Maybe, without Amelia taking up all the oxygen in the room, there would be space for Laura. But things only got worse. Without her sister to absorb the attention, Laura became the de facto housekeeper. At 14, she was expected to have dinner ready when her parents came home. Irina had stopped cooking altogether. "You're old enough now," she'd said one morning over her coffee. "We expect you to contribute." And so Laura cooked, cleaned, and studied in the dim corners of a house that never felt like her own. She excelled in school despite the pressure, often staying up late into the night to finish assignments after scrubbing floors and doing laundry. Her teachers noticed her brilliance, particularly in math and economics. They began encouraging her to enter academic competitions. When she brought home medals, her parents barely looked at them. It was Harold who truly understood what she was capable of. He began spending extra time with her, tutoring her in advanced mathematical theories far beyond her grade level. "You have a gift," he'd say, tapping the side of her head. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." These were the moments that kept her afloat. Her grandparents' love gave her strength. Their belief in her became her armor. At night, after the dishes were done and her homework complete, Laura would go online and browse university websites. She imagined herself walking across distant campuses, far from this house, this life, this ache. The only escape she could see was through education, through independence, and she was determined to earn it. By the time she turned 16, Laura had applied to several prestigious universities with strong finance programs. Her teachers had helped her polish her applications. Harold had read over every essay. Mabel had sewn a special dress for her scholarship interview at one Ivy League school. The day the acceptance letters arrived, Laura came home with 3 thick envelopes in hand, her heart pounding with pride and hope. She laid them out on the dinner table like rare jewels and waited for her parents to react. Irina glanced up briefly before returning to her meal. "That's nice," she murmured, "but we can't pay for it. We spent all our savings on Amelia's wedding, even had to take out a loan." Laura stared at her, stunned. "But you paid for Amelia's college?" "That was different," Irina said without looking up. She had potential. The silence that followed was heavier than any she had known before. Laura stood there, holding the unopened letters, feeling them grow heavier in her hands. Her father didn't even bother to speak. He continued eating as though nothing of importance had happened. She quietly excused herself, walked outside, and called Mabel with trembling fingers. Within the hour, she was standing at the front door of her grandparents' house, sobbing into Mabel's embrace as Harold came down the stairs, his face a mask of cold fury. But behind the anger, Laura saw something else. Pride. Fierce, righteous pride. As she told them everything, Harold took her hand and said, "We've been saving for your education since the day you were born. We knew this day would come." He disappeared into his study and returned with a thick folder full of bank statements and financial plans. "You can go to any of those universities," he said. "We've got you covered." That night, Laura packed her essentials and moved in with them. When she told her parents she was leaving, they didn't even look up from the television. Irina just said, "Whatever you think is best." And for the first time in her life, Laura realized she didn't need their permission to live. Laura adjusted quickly to life with her grandparents. It was a quiet, dignified home, filled with books, clocks that ticked softly, and the smell of warm tea and cinnamon. She no longer had to move silently or avoid the kitchen at certain hours. No longer did she eat alone in her room while her parents and Amelia laughed in the dining room. Instead, she found herself waking to Mabel's warm voice calling her for breakfast, and going to sleep after long talks with Harold about the world, about ideas, and sometimes about the pain they could see behind her calm eyes. Her days were long, but satisfying. She woke up early, helped Mabel with breakfast, walked to school, and returned in the evenings to a study schedule more intense than ever. Harold made it a personal mission to elevate her abilities. He brought her university-level math problems, guided her through economic theory, and treated her not as a child but as an equal. Mabel taught her balance, when to rest, when to breathe, how to stitch a hem and boil soup, but more than anything, she taught her that she was worthy of softness. There were moments when Laura wanted to believe that everything before had been a bad dream. But then she would look at photos of Amelia in newspapers, winning awards, attending her wedding in a lavish gown, beaming next to a husband Laura had never even met. And she was reminded that some things had always been true, no matter how far she tried to run. Still, those thoughts were fleeting. Laura was focused. She earned top marks, secured scholarships, and graduated from high school at the top of her class. With Harold and Mabel cheering her on in the front row, she crossed the stage with pride, clutching the diploma that symbolized her freedom. Her parents didn't attend. She hadn't expected them to. Amelia had apparently called that morning to tell Mabel that Irina had a migraine and Stephen had a work emergency. Mabel, who normally never spoke ill of anyone, simply sighed and said, "Of course." College was a dream she had carried like a flickering flame since she was 10. When she arrived at campus, it felt unreal. She had chosen a university renowned for its finance and economics programs, and from the first day, she was determined to stand out. While others partied or complained about lectures, Laura studied late into the night. She joined investment clubs, volunteered as a tutor, and spent her weekends reviewing case studies. Her classmates were ambitious, competitive, and often came from wealthy families. But Laura had something they didn't, an iron will forged from years of being underestimated. She rarely spoke of her past. Her peers knew her as brilliant, quiet, and disciplined. She never corrected them when they assumed her parents were proud or that she came from a stable, middle-class home. It was easier to let them believe that. She had built a version of herself that was untouchable, polished, and entirely her own. Each summer, while others returned to family vacations and lazy days at home, Laura took on internships. Her first was at a small local firm, where she was quickly noticed for her analytical skills. The following year, she landed a summer position at a prestigious financial institution, where she impressed senior staff with her ability to decipher patterns and data others missed. One partner even told her during an evaluation meeting that she had a mind built for the market. For the first time, Laura felt seen for who she truly was, not as a disappointment, not as an afterthought, but as someone exceptional. Still, the past lingered like smoke in the corners of her mind. She kept in touch with Mabel and Harold regularly, often calling them in the evenings to share her progress. Their encouragement never wavered. "We always knew you'd do great things," Harold would say, "and you haven't even started yet." It was only their belief in her that anchored her during the long days when imposter syndrome tried to creep in. But nothing lasts forever. In her third year of college, Harold passed away suddenly after suffering a heart attack in his sleep. Laura was devastated. She flew home immediately, her hands shaking the entire flight. Mabel greeted her at the door, looking smaller than Laura had ever seen her. They held each other in silence for a long time. At the funeral, Laura gave the eulogy. Her voice broke halfway through, but she continued speaking of his wisdom, his patience, his quiet strength. He had raised her, loved her, shaped her. She called him Dad for the first time aloud in public, and no one corrected her. Mabel's health began to decline shortly after. Her sharpness dulled, her steps slowed, and Laura found herself split in time between classes and traveling back home to help. She stayed up late, studying beside her grandmother's bed, holding her hand between chapters and whispering updates on her classes. 2 months after Harold, Mabel slipped away peacefully in her sleep. Laura returned to school with a hollow ache in her chest. She was 22 and had lost the only real parent she had ever known. The grief was vast and cold, but it did not consume her. Instead, it hardened into resolve. She would finish her degree. She would make them proud. And she did. Upon graduation, Laura was immediately hired by a prominent financial firm in the city. Her starting salary was more than her parents had ever earned in a year. She moved into a clean, modest one-bedroom apartment and furnished it with care. For the first time in her life, everything around her belonged solely to her. She could cook when she wanted, wake when she pleased, decorate without judgment. And each morning, as she slipped on her suit and adjusted her badge at the firm's security checkpoint, she felt a quiet pride rising within her. At work, she quickly gained a reputation as someone to watch. Her projects were detailed, her pitches clear, and her instincts almost unnervingly accurate. Her supervisor, a woman named Carla, took her under her wing and began grooming her for leadership. Within 5 years, Laura was promoted twice, eventually managing a small team of analysts. Her portfolio grew. Her bonuses became substantial. She began investing wisely, learning from mentors and following the same rules Harold once taught her: patience, precision, and honesty with numbers. Meanwhile, her connection with her biological family had become minimal. She spoke with Amelia only once during those years, when Amelia called her unexpectedly to ask for help with a resume. Laura assisted out of politeness, then returned to her silence. She heard about their lives occasionally through neighbors back home or old acquaintances. Amelia had 2 children now, twin boys, and was struggling to keep her marketing business afloat. Her husband, Darren, was often between jobs. Their parents had drained their retirement savings, helping them stay afloat. At first, Laura felt no urge to reach out. They had made their choices just as she had made hers. But as the years passed and Laura continued to build her life, traveling, growing professionally, collecting memories of things she had once only dreamed of, something shifted. One evening, while reviewing a client's financial history, she thought about her own legacy. Harold and Mabel had given her everything, not just money or education, but love, identity, and foundation. And though she had been deeply hurt by Irina and Stephen, they were aging now, struggling, and perhaps in need. She began to consider what it would mean to do something for them, not out of obligation, but as a gesture of closure. She didn't want revenge or reconciliation. She wanted peace. She wanted to give herself the final word. So Laura did what she always did. She planned. She researched neighborhoods, hired a real estate agent, and eventually found a charming single-story home with a garden in a quiet suburb. It was perfect for an aging couple. No stairs, wide hallways, and plenty of natural light. The kitchen had granite counters and new appliances. The backyard had space for children to play in case the twins visited. She paid in full. When she handed Irina and Stephen the keys, their reaction surprised her. Irina cried. Stephen hugged her for the first time in years. They thanked her over and over, called her our girl, and told her they never expected such kindness. For a brief moment, Laura let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, they had changed. That perhaps this was a turning point. A housewarming party was discussed. Stephen promised to organize it. Irina insisted that Laura be the guest of honor. "We'll make it special," she said. "You deserve that." Laura waited. Weeks passed, and no invitation came. At first, she made excuses for them in her mind. They were busy. Moving took time. They were older now. Maybe they were planning a surprise. But then, one evening, unable to resist the old pull of curiosity and instinct, she typed Amelia's name into Facebook. They weren't connected, but her profile was public. The top post stopped her breath. "Can't wait for this Saturday's housewarming party for Mom and Dad. So excited to celebrate this beautiful new home with everyone." The post had dozens of comments. Friends, family, even people Laura hadn't seen in years, all confirming their attendance. Pictures of the house's interior were already up. Her house, her purchase, her gift. And yet, her name wasn't mentioned once. Something inside her cracked, not with sadness, but with clarity. She had never been meant to belong. Not to them, not truly, but that was about to change. Saturday arrived beneath an overcast sky, the kind that left the air feeling heavy and uncommitted. Lara had spent the morning pacing the confines of her apartment, attempting to reason herself into peace, to tell herself that it didn't matter, that she didn't need validation from a party. But something more profound than disappointment pulled at her chest. It was betrayal, deep and cutting, made worse by the silence. The people who had never truly loved her were now celebrating her sacrifice without her. And they had done so without hesitation, without acknowledgement. Her parents, the same ones who hadn't lifted a hand to help her when she needed them most, were now dancing in a house she bought, eating catered food she didn't approve, and toasting to their own dreams, as if she didn't exist. She parked a block away, not trusting herself to pull into the driveway. From her car, she could see the warm glow spilling from the windows, silhouettes of guests mingling in the living room and kitchen. Someone had draped twinkling lights along the hedges, and there were gold and white balloons tied to the mailbox. A large banner over the front porch read, "Welcome Home," in cursive. Her father stood at the door, shaking hands and clapping backs. Irina, wearing a pearl necklace Lara had never seen before, greeted guests with practiced warmth. Inside, Lara glimpsed Amelia with a wine glass in hand, laughing with a group of neighbors. The twins darted past her legs, dressed in matching outfits. It was a tableau of joy, belonging, and celebration, but Lara wasn't in it. The weight of everything, the years of being overlooked, the quiet sacrifices, the loss of her grandparents, the ceaseless effort to be good, to be better, gathered inside her like a storm. She closed her eyes and breathed in deeply, but it didn't clear her head. Instead, it sharpened everything. This wasn't just a party. This was erasure. She stepped out of the car and walked slowly around the side of the house, unnoticed in the din of music and chatter. The side gate had been left ajar. She passed the garden beds she had paid to have installed, the small herb patch by the patio, and the swing set that now hosted the twins' jackets and juice boxes. As she neared the back sliding doors, she paused, peering through the glass. The living room was filled with familiar and unfamiliar faces. Her father stood before a cluster of guests holding a glass aloft. "After all these years," he said proudly, "we finally did it. Our dream home. It's been a journey, but we made it." Laughter and applause followed. Lara didn't move. Her eyes moved to her mother, who stepped forward, beaming. "And let's not forget Amelia," Irina said, smiling as she placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "She helped us so much with the down payment. Always thinking of family first, unlike some people." There was a ripple of chuckles around the room. Lara's mouth went dry. She opened the sliding door and stepped inside. The room went silent. Heads turned. Irina froze, her mouth still open mid-sentence. Stephen dropped his glass, the stem snapping as it hit the floor. "Actually," Lara said, her voice calm, almost quiet, "I think you've got that backward." It was as if the air had been sucked out of the room. Amelia's eyes narrowed, confusion flickering into recognition. One of the twins, still unaware of the tension, tugged at his mother's sleeve. "Mommy, who's that lady?" Stephen recovered first. He forced a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Lara, what a surprise. We didn't know you were coming." "No," Lara said, stepping farther into the room. because you didn't invite me to the housewarming party for the house I bought." A gasp echoed somewhere near the dining room. Irina's color drained from her face. Amelia set down her wine glass with a loud clink. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Irina began, voice trembling but attempting control. "We were going to—" "You were going to do what?" Lara interrupted, turning slowly to face the entire room. "Let me find out on social media that my family is throwing a party in the house I paid for? That you've moved Amelia and her family into it without even telling me?" Irina tried to smile, but it faltered. "You can't expect eternal gratitude. We thought you wanted to help us. We thought you'd moved on with your life." "I had," Lara said, reaching into her bag and pulling out a manila folder. She stepped forward and laid it on the coffee table. "This is the deed to this property. It's in my name. I never signed it over to you." Her father's hands were shaking as he reached for the folder, flipping through the documents with disbelief. "You can't do this," he said finally, looking up at her. "This is our home now. The twins need a yard, Amelia's family." "It's not my responsibility," Lara snapped. "You made it clear when I was 16 that your love, your money, your support, those were all reserved for her. You spent everything on her wedding, on her dreams. You had nothing left for me, and that was your choice." Amelia stepped forward, her tone indignant. "You're really going to make a scene in front of everyone after everything we've been through?" "No, Amelia," Lara said. "I'm going to make a point." She turned to the stunned guests. "I'm sorry for the disruption, but this party is over. This is my home, and I didn't authorize this event. I'm asking everyone to leave." For a moment, no one moved. Then a murmur started, and guests began gathering their things awkwardly. Someone picked up a plate still full of shrimp cocktail. Another man quietly folded a lawn chair. One by one, the guests shuffled out, casting glances between Lara and her parents. Amelia stood rooted, furious. "This is ridiculous. You're going to kick out your own family?" Lara met her gaze, unblinking. "You're not my family. You're the people who made me feel like I didn't belong. And now you've proven that you still believe I don't. But this house is mine. And I'm done being erased from my own life." Irina's voice broke as she pleaded. "Lara, we didn't mean it like that. We were just trying to give the boys stability. Please, don't do this." Lara's voice softened, but not with kindness. "You did this. I gave you a chance to change, to start over, but you chose the same path you always have, and now I'm choosing mine." By the time the last guest had left, the sun had begun to set. The yard was littered with crumpled napkins, half-empty cups, and the remains of a celebration that had never belonged to her. Stephen stood near the front steps, looking older than she remembered, his shoulders slumped. Irina held Amelia's twins by the hand, both boys now crying, confused by the sudden shift in tone. Lara didn't speak again. She closed the door behind them. Inside, the silence was profound. The house smelled like roses and roast chicken. There were decorations still hanging in the hallway. A banner in the kitchen read, "Home Sweet Home." Lara tore it down with one swift motion. She sat at the dining table for a long time, her fingers tracing the grain of the wood. There had been a time when she thought this act, buying a house for her parents, would heal something. That if she gave enough, tried hard enough, she could finally be seen. But now she knew better. Love, real love, was not earned through sacrifice or suffering. It was given freely, like Harold and Mabel had given it. That night, Lara packed away the decorations and cleaned the house. She erased every trace of a party she had never been meant to attend. When she finished, she stood in the middle of the empty living room, arms folded, and allowed herself to feel something she hadn't let in for years. Freedom. It was bitter and beautiful all at once. The following day, she received the first voicemail. Irina, her voice tight and wounded, accused Lara of cruelty. "You humiliated us," she said. "You've become so heartless, just like they warned us you would." Lara didn't listen to the second message, or the third. Instead, she opened her laptop and scheduled a meeting with a real estate agent. This house had been a symbol. Now it was a conclusion. It had given her what she needed, the clarity to let go. And now it was time to begin again. The week after the housewarming party that never truly was passed in a blur. Lara returned to her apartment, her silence a cocoon. The voicemail notifications on her phone multiplied, but she didn't listen. Not out of rage, though anger was there, simmering, but out of resolve. There was nothing they could say that would unmake what had been done. Her parents' voices, once painfully familiar, now felt like relics of a version of herself she no longer wished to keep alive. It wasn't even about the house anymore. It was about the clarity that had crashed down on her in that moment, standing amid smiling guests in a home she had bought out of hope, only to be erased from its narrative. It was about a lifetime of being told, implicitly and explicitly, that she was always going to be second best. Her real estate agent was polite, efficient, and mildly surprised by her decision to sell so soon after purchase. Lara offered no explanation. She didn't need to justify her choices to anyone. The market was still strong and the location desirable. Within days, the listing went live, and calls began coming in. Lara took none of them personally. The house had become a husk, beautiful, expensive, but hollow. She didn't mourn it. It was never truly hers. It had been meant as a gift, an offering of peace, and peace, she now understood, could not be negotiated with people who didn't know how to honor it. Yet, even as she moved forward with the sale, shadows clung to her. She found herself restless at night, wandering her apartment in the dark. Her mind replayed moments from childhood like a scratched film reel, the night she won her first math award and brought it home, only for Irina to brush past her to check Amelia's homework, the time she caught the flu and lay feverish on the couch while Stephen asked her to keep it down because Amelia was studying. The memories rose not as wounds to be refelt, but as evidence in a quiet trial she had spent her whole life conducting. And now the verdict was in. They had never wanted her, not truly. They had tolerated her, raised her, dressed her in hand-me-downs and sent her to school. But they had never loved her in the way every child deserves to be loved, unconditionally. She had never dared say that aloud, not even to herself. But now, standing on the precipice of fully severing ties, she said it plainly in her mind, and, instead of sorrow, she felt a strange, liberating calm. The calls continued. The voicemails took on new tones. First came fury, accusations of cruelty, selfishness, betrayal. Then came desperation. Her mother's voice cracked with theatrical anguish, begging Lara to reconsider, to think of the twins, to remember what family is supposed to mean. Her father called once, then again, then stopped trying altogether. Amelia, surprisingly, was the most persistent. Her messages ranged from scathing insults to weepy appeals, often within the same paragraph. "You've always been jealous," she hissed in one. "You finally got your revenge. Are you happy?" In another, "The boys keep asking about you. They miss you. They love you. Is that worth throwing away?" Lara didn't answer. She didn't block the numbers either. Instead, she let the messages accumulate, their contents a slow, pitiful unraveling of a family that had never imagined she would choose herself. But still, a hollowness lingered. Late one night, unable to sleep, she pulled out the box of old journals she had kept since college. Inside were notes from Harold, photos of Mabel cooking, and scribbled pages from her younger self, raw, aching entries that cataloged every forgotten birthday, every unmet gaze, every time she wished she were someone else. She read them by lamplight, her eyes stinging not with fresh pain, but with empathy for the girl she had once been. She had spent so much time trying to prove she was worthy of love that she had mistaken silence for strength. She realized that now. Her grandparents had loved her, yes, fiercely and without condition, but her refusal to grieve the loss of her parents' love, or lack thereof, had kept her in a cycle of reaching and breaking, hoping and hurting. Even her decision to buy the house had come from that place, a belief that if she did something grand enough, generous enough, it would finally open the door that had always been closed to her, and they had slammed it again without a second thought. That realization didn't break her. It rebuilt her. In the following days, Lara began reordering her life. She started therapy, something she had always told herself she didn't need. Her therapist, a soft-spoken woman named Nina, listened without interruption as Lara recounted her story from childhood to the confrontation in the house. "They didn't just forget to love you," Nina said gently. "They chose not to. That wasn't your fault." The words settled into Lara's bones like something sacred. It wasn't her fault. She hadn't failed. They had. Around the same time, a colleague from work, a woman named Dana, invited Lara for coffee. They weren't close, more professional acquaintances than friends, but Dana had noticed something had shifted in Lara's demeanor lately. "You seem lighter," she said after their second cup. "Still focused, but freer, like you let something go." Lara smiled. She didn't explain, but later that night she thought about what Dana had said, and for the first time in months she slept without waking. The closing of the house sale happened quietly. The new owners were a couple with 2 young children, full of excitement and plans for renovations. Lara handed over the keys without ceremony. As she walked back to her car, she didn't look back. The house, the party, the voices that had tried to shame her for setting boundaries, they were behind her now, in every sense. Her apartment became a sanctuary. She redecorated it not out of necessity, but out of joy. She painted the walls a soft forest green. She bought bookshelves and filled them with titles Harold once recommended. She framed a picture of Mabel holding a pie, one arm outstretched to keep Harold from sneaking a slice. She placed it on the mantel with reverence. And then she began dreaming again. Not of reconciliation or revenge, but of something more honest. A life she could build on her own terms. A legacy she could create not out of pain, but from healing. She began researching foundations and community programs. Her mind drifted to children who, like her, had been made to feel unwanted, invisible. What if she could be their Harold, their Mabel? She wasn't ready yet, but she was close. A letter arrived in the mail a week after the house sold, handwritten, thick with emotion. It was from Irina. The envelope was cream-colored, her handwriting elegant and immediately recognizable. Lara held it for a long moment, debating. In the past, she would have opened it instantly, searching for even a scrap of softness, a sliver of apology. But now, she simply walked to her trash bin, tore the letter in half without reading, and dropped it inside. There was nothing they could say that would change what had happened, nothing they could offer that would make her forget the decades of indifference. Love, she now understood fully, was not a prize to be earned, and family was not defined by obligation or blood. It was defined by presence, by effort, by choice. Harold and Mabel had chosen her every day. Irina and Stephen had not, and that, more than anything, was the truth she finally accepted without shame. In the days that followed, Laura made a list. Not a to-do list, but a life list, what she wanted to build, give, and experience. She wrote down things both big and small. Start a scholarship in her grandparents' name, volunteer weekly, take a pottery class, travel to Ghana where her grandmother's parents had been born, learn how to grow tomatoes, learn how to rest, love without fear. She pinned the list above her desk, and then she smiled. There were still scars, still moments when the ache returned like a ghost. But now she welcomed it. It reminded her that she had survived, and more importantly, that she had grown into someone who refused to disappear, who had learned to choose herself in a world that never made space for her. The breaking point, she realized, wasn't about destruction. It was about liberation. And for the first time in her life, Laura was free. The summer that followed was unusually warm. The city hummed with the clamor of traffic and life, and Laura, now unanchored from the weight of obligation, found herself floating through the days with a calm she didn't quite know how to describe. She was no longer plagued by the heavy silence of her parents or the suffocating need for their approval. She was no longer haunted by the idea of repairing something that had never been whole to begin with. And yet, as the house she had sold passed into the hands of its new family, and the door to that chapter shut with finality, another kind of silence took root, a quieter, more introspective one. Laura didn't speak to anyone from her biological family after the day she destroyed the letter from Irina. The messages had finally stopped. Whether it was resignation or simply the realization that she wouldn't bend, she didn't know, but the stillness that followed was eerie. For years, even through estrangement and disappointment, there had always been some form of noise. Now there was none. Just the echo of her own thoughts and the empty hum of peace laced with sadness. She spent more time at home than ever before. She read more, cooked, took long walks through neighborhoods she never used to explore. The city had always seemed fast and cold to her when she first arrived, but now she noticed its hidden warmth. The elderly man who watered his balcony garden each morning, the children who drew chalk flowers on the pavement near the park, the couple who danced beneath a speaker at the weekend farmers market. She saw life in motion, and for the first time she wasn't watching from behind glass. Still, there were days when her thoughts circled the past like buzzards. She would remember sitting cross-legged on the floor of the living room, her hands sticky with glue from a school project, while her parents spoke to Amelia about college tours. She would remember watching Amelia open birthday gifts while she received a single card signed with indifference. She would remember the way her mother's lips curled slightly whenever Laura spoke too confidently, too loudly, as though being self-assured was a flaw to be corrected. The memories didn't bring the sting they once did. Instead, they brought a kind of numb understanding. A confirmation of all she had known, but never dared say aloud. She had been an outsider in her own home, raised within walls that belonged to her, but never for her. Work, as always, became her sanctuary. Her promotion to senior analyst had positioned her as a leader among peers, And though she maintained her composure, her sharp mind and measured tone earned her a respect that was impossible to ignore. Clients sought her out. Interns admired her. Executives nodded when she entered a room. Carla, her mentor and now close confidant, took her aside one day during a quarterly review and said, "You know, there's talk about you being fast-tracked for executive leadership." Laura had smiled, not out of pride, but out of something deeper. She had built this from nothing, not a cent of family money, not a drop of inherited influence. Only grit, time, and the memory of every door that had been closed in her face. Still, there was one part of her life that remained quiet, untouched. Friendship had always been elusive for Laura. She had colleagues, acquaintances, people who liked her, but she had spent so long building walls that few had been allowed to see inside. That changed slowly, almost imperceptibly, over lunches with Dana, over late-night texts from a coworker-turned-friend named Elise, over the decision to join a local book club that met in the back of a cozy cafe once a week. There, she met people from different backgrounds, different lives, who welcomed her without knowing her story. It felt honest, safe, but even that safety couldn't prevent what came next. It was Elise who told her, in a hesitant voice over the phone, that her parents and Amelia had moved into a cramped apartment complex on the east end of the city. Elise's cousin, a real estate agent, had handled the lease. "They're all living together," Elise said. "Your parents, Amelia, her husband, the kids. It's tight. I think they were expecting something else. I thought you should know." Laura thanked her but said nothing more. That evening, she walked to a coffee shop, ordered a drink she barely touched, and sat near the window, watching people pass by. She wondered how they were fitting 3 generations into such a small space. She wondered if the twins understood why they had moved. She wondered if Amelia had spun a new story, one where Laura had been the villain again, cold and calculating. The idea didn't sting. It didn't even surprise her. She had spent most of her life watching narratives form around her without her consent. It didn't matter anymore. She had the truth, and the truth had set her free. And yet, a part of her, small and stubborn, still hurt. She imagined Irina in the narrow kitchen, scolding someone for leaving the light on. Stephen, shoulders hunched, trying to read in the dim corner of a crowded living room. Amelia, pacing with frustration, the boys too loud, the walls too thin. There was no victory in it. No pleasure. Only quiet confirmation that choices had consequences. A few days later, Laura passed the building on her way to a client meeting. It wasn't intentional, just a quirk of the city's grid. But when she saw the rusted balcony rails and peeling paint, something inside her paused. She stopped walking, stood across the street, and watched as the twins ran circles in the small, fenced courtyard. Amelia appeared in the doorway, calling to them. Her voice was sharper than Laura remembered, tired in a way that only chronic resentment can shape. Laura watched for a few more moments, then turned and walked away. That night, she sat at her desk and began drafting a new kind of letter, not one addressed to her family, but to herself. A promise, not an apology. She promised never to beg for love again. Never to offer pieces of herself to people who only knew how to take. She promised that when she had children, if she chose to, she would never make them compete for her affection. She would love loudly, without condition, without comparisons. She also promised to remember, not out of bitterness, but as a marker of how far she had come. She would remember the girl who had cleaned bathrooms after school while her sister attended ballet. She would remember the teenager who was told there was no money for her education. She would remember the young woman who bought a house only to be locked out of it, and she would remember that she survived it all. Not just survived, but grew from it. In the weeks that followed, Lara began volunteering at a youth mentoring program downtown. It started with a single Saturday morning, tutoring middle school girls in math. But soon, she was returning each week, offering resume help, college prep advice, and, most of all, time. The girls gravitated toward her, not because she was successful, but because she listened. She saw them. One afternoon, a 12-year-old named Kaya asked her, "Do you think I could ever be like you?" Lara looked at her, saw the flicker of doubt, the need to be reassured. "You can be better," she said softly. "You don't have to become me. You get to become you." The girl beamed, and in that smile, Lara felt something shift again. This was where her story was going now. She didn't need a perfect family to create a legacy. She didn't need to erase her past to shape her future. She needed only to walk forward with intention, holding close the lessons of her pain and using them to build something better. For herself, for others, for the girl she had once been, and for the woman she was still becoming. Autumn settled over the city with a quiet grace, painting the trees in shades of ember and gold, as if nature itself were shedding what no longer served. Lara often found herself walking longer routes home just to watch the leaves fall, to feel the wind shift through her coat and remind her that transformation was not only possible, but necessary. Each day felt like a deeper breath, and though grief still hung around her like a shadow, it no longer dictated the direction of her steps. Instead, it became something quieter, manageable, a familiar ache that taught her to hold herself with gentleness. The youth mentoring program downtown had grown from a weekend activity into something deeply rooted in her routine. Lara became a fixture in the lives of a handful of girls who, like her, carried wounds too heavy for their age. She didn't tell them her full story, but she didn't have to. They saw it in her eyes, in the way she didn't flinch at their confessions, didn't rush them to feel better or act braver. With Lara, they felt steady, safe. One Saturday morning, a shy girl named Nia stayed behind after the others had left. She lingered by the door, her backpack hanging off one shoulder, fingers twisting around the strap. "Miss Lara," she said, voice barely above a whisper, "how do you stop feeling like you're not good enough?" Lara looked at her for a long moment, then crossed the room and sat on the edge of the table. "You don't stop feeling it all at once," she said honestly. "Sometimes it comes back, especially when you're tired or hurting, but you learn how to stop believing it." Nia nodded slowly, her eyes glassy. "Even if your own mom makes you feel that way." "Especially then," Lara said softly. That evening, Lara returned home and cried, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming weight of recognition. She saw herself in these girls, not as she had wanted to be, but as she truly had been. Scared, isolated, invisible. And now she had become the person she once wished for. That was not a small thing. It was everything. In the midst of this healing, a new opportunity surfaced, one she hadn't anticipated. The nonprofit that operated the youth center invited her to join their board of advisors. They had taken note of her commitment, her clarity, and her ability to connect. It was an unpaid role, but an influential one, with a chance to shape policies and funding priorities. Lara accepted without hesitation. It felt like a homecoming of a different kind, a seat at a table she had built for herself. That same week, she visited Harold and Mabel's grave. It was a crisp, cloudless afternoon. She brought flowers, white lilies for Mabel, wild sunflowers for Harold, and knelt before the stone etched with both their names. She spoke aloud, though no one was around to hear. "I think you knew," she said, "that they would never change, that they would never love me the way you did. I think that's why you left me the way you did, prepared." She ran her fingers over the stone, felt the chill of the granite against her skin. "I'm okay," she whispered. "I'm more than okay. You would be proud." There was no reply, of course, but the wind picked up gently, rustling the leaves around her feet, and she took it as enough. A week later, she received an email from her lawyer. It was brief. Her parents had attempted to contest the legality of the house transfer even after it had been sold. The case had no merit, and the attorney assured her it would be dismissed without escalation. Lara didn't reply immediately. She stared at the screen for a long time, heart steady, thoughts unmoved. In a different life, this might have reignited the fury, the hurt. But now, it only confirmed what she already knew. Some people would never take responsibility. They would rewrite history again and again, not to find peace, but to preserve a version of themselves that never included their own cruelty. She closed the email and deleted it. That night, Lara pulled out a fresh notebook and began sketching plans for something new. A foundation. Not just a scholarship fund or donation pipeline, but something permanent. An initiative under Harold and Mabel's names, designed to support girls of color in underserved communities who wanted to study finance, mathematics, or business. Girls like her. Girls who needed to be seen. She named it the M&H Legacy Initiative. It took weeks of planning, drafting, consulting with legal and nonprofit professionals, but piece by piece, it came together. By winter, it was ready for launch. Lara announced it publicly through a modest press release and a short interview in a financial journal. She didn't want attention, only reach. The first round of scholarship applications would open in spring. The response was larger than she anticipated. Colleagues, alumni networks, even clients reached out offering support, funding, connections. People she hadn't spoken to in years congratulated her. And yet, there was only one response she secretly waited for, a message from her parents. It never came. On the day the website went live, Lara sat at her desk, staring at the homepage. The banner showed a collage of young girls studying, smiling, raising their hands in classrooms. The caption below read, "Because every girl deserves to be believed in." She closed her eyes and let herself feel the full weight of it. This was her inheritance. Not rejection, not silence, not pain, but legacy, hope, continuity. And then, in one last act of closure, Lara gathered every object connected to her parents, old cards, forgotten gifts, outdated photos, and placed them in a single box. She didn't burn it. She didn't destroy it. She sealed it, labeled it, and stored it in the back of her closet. Not to forget, but to contain. To set a boundary. That same evening, she returned to the small apartment complex where her parents now lived. She didn't enter. She stood across the street again, watched the lights flicker through the window, saw the shadows of movement. Amelia pacing, the twins on the floor, her mother at the sink. And for the first time, she felt no sorrow, only distance, only clarity. She got back in her car and drove home. When she arrived, there was a message waiting for her on the doorstep, a small envelope with no return address. Her name was written in familiar cursive. She didn't open it. She carried it to her kitchen, placed it next to the stove, and went to bed. In the morning, she tore it in half and dropped it in the trash. Not out of anger, but out of choice. The freedom to not respond was its own kind of reply. Lara sat on her balcony that afternoon, sipping tea, sunlight warming her skin. She watched the city move around her, a million lives intersecting and unfolding. She thought of Mabel's hands folding dough, Harold's voice explaining compound interest, her younger self curled in the corner of a cold room dreaming of escape. And she smiled. The cycle had ended with her. The release wasn't loud or dramatic. It was soft, quiet, final. The following spring arrived with quiet steadiness, not abrupt or theatrical, but with the same confidence Lara had come to cultivate within herself. Rain swept over the streets in gentle rhythms, and the trees, once bare and brittle, bloomed into full green canopies that cast dappled shadows over the sidewalks. Lara's apartment filled with light again, and this time she let it stay. The heavy curtains that once covered her windows were gone. She had replaced them with white linen, the kind that danced in the breeze when she left the windows open. Everything in her space breathed easier now. No more muted colors or closed doors. Her home, much like her life, was hers at last, and it no longer needed to hide. The M&H Legacy Initiative had launched its first scholarship cycle in March. Over 200 applications flooded in from across the state, essays filled with vulnerability and vision, stories from girls who reminded Lara so much of herself that it felt like looking through time. She read every single one personally, sometimes through tears, often through admiration. There were girls whose parents had dismissed their dreams of studying math, others who worked part-time to support siblings, some who had escaped foster care or homelessness. Their ambition was not driven by privilege, but by pure, relentless belief in something better. When she and the selection board finalized the list of recipients, Lara sent the emails herself. She wanted them to see her name. She wanted them to know that someone real, someone like them, had made this possible. And in each email she included the same closing line: "You are more than enough. You always were." The press took modest interest in the story. A young black woman, once neglected and underestimated, now funding futures with her own hands. A local radio station asked for an interview. A podcast episode followed, but Lara didn't lean into the attention. She shared only what mattered. She didn't speak about her family. She didn't discuss the house. That chapter had closed. Her story now was about what came after. She still passed the apartment complex sometimes, not often and never on purpose, but the city had its loops and patterns, and there were days when fate curved just so. The last time she saw Amelia, the older woman had been unloading groceries from the back of a tired sedan while the twins quarreled loudly on the sidewalk. Lara had slowed her pace but hadn't stopped. Amelia looked up briefly. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. No wave, no smile, just an acknowledgement. Something brittle, something resigned. Lara kept walking. It had taken years, but the power Amelia and her parents once held over her had dwindled into dust. There was no anger now, no ache, just a hollowed-out place where something used to be, like the socket of a tooth that no longer throbbed. She could live without it. In late April, Lara was invited to speak at a university alumni event. The theme was ownership of self, leadership beyond legacy. And though public speaking was not something she typically pursued, this invitation felt different. It wasn't a conference or a technical panel, it was personal, intimate, the kind of room where stories could shape lives. She stood before a room of women, many of them first-generation college graduates, many of them still carrying the weight of families that never fully saw them. She didn't read from a script. She spoke from the place she had spent her whole life trying to reach. I used to think that if I just worked hard enough, gave enough, loved enough, I would finally be accepted. I built my life on the hope that my worth could earn someone else's love. And when it didn't, when I gave and still wasn't chosen, I thought it meant I wasn't enough. But what I know now is this. Being overlooked is not a reflection of your value. It's a reflection of their blindness. The room was still, every eye fixed on her. I am not the daughter they wanted, but I am the woman I chose to become, and that's a legacy no one can take from me. After the event, women lined up to speak with her. Some cried. Some simply held her hand. One whispered, "You said what I've been trying to tell myself for years." Laura nodded, not out of pride, but understanding. She didn't see herself as heroic. She saw herself as living proof. That night, she returned home to a letter waiting in her mailbox. Her name was on the front in handwriting she didn't recognize. It was from one of the scholarship recipients, a 17-year-old girl from a town Laura had never heard of. The letter was 3 pages long and handwritten, full of misspellings and sincerity. "Miss Laura," it began, "I never thought someone like me would matter to someone like you." Laura read it 3 times. Later, she placed the letter in a drawer alongside her journals and photographs, but not the box. The box, with remnants of her parents' presents, had remained sealed in the back of her closet. She hadn't touched it in months, hadn't even thought of opening it. And now, as spring moved toward summer, she knew she never would. It no longer held her past, only evidence of what no longer bound her. One Sunday morning, Laura visited the cemetery again. The sky was soft with cloud, and the wind carried the scent of lilacs from the trees nearby. She brought no flowers this time, only herself. She sat on the bench beside Harold and Mabel's headstone and closed her eyes. "I did it," she whispered, "not because of them, but because of you." She imagined Mabel smiling, Harold nodding in quiet approval. In her mind, they didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their love had always been made of presence, not performance. Before she left, she placed her hand gently on the stone and said, "I'll keep building." And she would. In the months that followed, Laura expanded the foundation, adding mentorship programs and financial literacy workshops. She partnered with schools, recruited volunteers, and created a summer fellowship for young women who wanted to shadow professionals in business and economics. The work was exhausting, but never draining. It filled her in ways nothing else ever had. She began writing as well, not for publication, but for herself. Essays, reflections, letters to her younger self. Sometimes she thought of compiling them into a book, but she didn't rush. This part of her life no longer needed urgency. She had time now, and freedom, and agency. One afternoon, she sat on her balcony with a notebook open on her lap. A breeze moved through the pages, lifting one corner gently before letting it settle again. She looked out at the city skyline, the place that had become her home, not because it welcomed her easily, but because she had claimed it. The chapter of being an afterthought was long closed. This was her story now, and she was its author. If you found this story powerful, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss what's coming next. Make sure to watch our other videos for more real-life stories that will stay with you. And if this touched you, share it with someone who needs to hear it.